Okay, so get ready for this. Imagine you're back in 1959, the Cold War is raging, and everyone's worried about, nuclear bombs and espionage. But the showdown we're diving into today, it all went down in, of all places, a kitchen. Yep, a kitchen.
It's called the kitchen debate, and it perfectly shows how even the most everyday stuff got caught up in this global power struggle. We're talking about an actual model American kitchen set up right in the heart of Moscow that became this battleground between the U.S. and the Soviet Union.
Yeah. Our source material, a whole podcast episode about this event, really gets into the nitty-gritty. Like, how did kitchen appliances become these, symbols of ideology? And get this, a brownie mix somehow got tangled up in international relations.
It's a textbook example of manifest domesticity, this idea that your home, your stuff, becomes a way to show off national values. In this case, the U.S. was going all out to show off their abundance and consumerism.
So, let's set the stage here. 1959, Cold War tensions are super high, but there's this, awkward attempt at a cultural exchange. Both the U.S. and the USSR put on these exhibitions to, try and win over hearts and minds.
Right. It was all about soft power. The U.S. wanted to wow the Soviets with their capitalist way of life, how everyday Americans had all these amazing gadgets and conveniences.
And what better way to do that than with a shiny modern kitchen packed with every appliance you can imagine? The American National Exhibition in Moscow was this huge display of the American dream, suggesting anyone could have this lifestyle.
But, the Soviets had just launched Sputnik a few years before. They were feeling pretty good about their space race wins, so they weren't about to back down. They wanted to push their own narrative about the success of communism.
Right, and here's where it gets interesting. On one side, you've got Vice President Richard Nixon, super ambitious, totally anti-communist, and ready to prove that America was the best, hands down.
And on the other side, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev, known for being blunt, boisterous, and totally unafraid to brag about communist achievements.
Talk about a clash of personalities.
Yeah.
Nixon, all carefully composed and image-conscious, and Khrushchev, unpredictable and, using humor to make his points. This alone makes their encounter pretty explosive.
Totally. The personalities just amplified the Cold War tension. So what starts as this innocent photo op in this model kitchen turns into a full-blown debate. There's this famous photo of Nixon and Khrushchev flanking a washing machine with Leonid Brezhnev in the background looking super serious. It really captures the mood.
It's like even the appliances are part of the ideological battle. Yeah. And the debate gets pretty heated. Nixon's argument was that American kitchens with all their labor-saving gadgets meant a higher quality of life, even freedom for women.
Yeah, he was saying these appliances free up women from housework, give them time for other things. It ties into this whole social shift happening in America with more women entering the workforce.
But Khrushchev wasn't having any of it. He said Soviet women don't need fancy gadgets and that communism would soon surpass capitalist achievements. And he says this line, which I love. You can't put Marxism in your clothes or your soup.
Such a clever way to dismiss the idea that possessions are the measure of success. He's saying ideology trumps consumer goods, a core communist idea. But they both knew this wasn't just about kitchens. The whole world was watching, and they were trying to project strength and dominance on the world stage.
And it wasn't just for show, right? Later on, both Nixon and Khrushchev admitted how important the kitchen debate was. It showed the Cold War wasn't just about military power. It was about winning over people, convincing the world which system was better.
It makes you think about how even our everyday choices can reflect these bigger ideologies. Think about your own kitchen. What do the appliances you use, the food you buy, even how you cook, say about your values?
Mind-blowing. Something as personal as a kitchen can be tied to these massive global forces. But there's a twist. Remember all that food the U.S. brought to Moscow? Tons of it, showing off their abundance.
And here's the weird part. They wouldn't let any of the Soviet visitors eat the American food.
Wait, seriously? Why even bother bringing it if nobody could taste it? There's got to be a reason for that.
It's a bit of a mystery. It could be logistics, maybe food safety worries, or even something political. It definitely adds to the intrigue.
And the irony is, later on, the USSR had trouble feeding their own people and ended up importing grain from the U.S. History has a strange sense of humor.
It shows how complex the Cold War was. Even with their ideological differences, both sides were affected by these global economic and agricultural forces. But we've only scratched the surface. The kitchen debate had effects that went way beyond this one event.
So what kind of impact are we talking about? What should we focus on as we dig deeper into this?
Well, for one, the kitchen debate made Nixon look like this tough Cold Warrior, which helped his political career. But it also solidified this idea of manifest domesticity, where what happens in your house reflects national identity and global power dynamics. To see how that played out, we need to look at how America got obsessed with food and consumerism. That's where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive.
So last time we were talking about how the U.S. sent all this food to their exhibition in Moscow, like 7 tons of it. But then they didn't actually let any of the Soviet visitors try it. It just seems so weird. Like, why even bother with the food if no one gets to taste it?
Yeah, it does seem a bit strange when you put it like that. But remember, the food wasn't the whole story, right? The point was to showcase just how much abundance and variety America had. Imagine walking into this exhibition and seeing shelves stacked with all this food. Canned goods, frozen meals, all kinds of stuff. It would be a pretty powerful image, even if you couldn't eat any of it.
So it was all about creating this image of American wealth and prosperity. Like, hey, look at all the food we have. Look how well our system works.
Exactly. And it wasn't just about the quantity, it was also about the technology. Frozen food was still a pretty new thing back then, and so were instant cake mixes, prepackaged meals, all that. They represented convenience, efficiency, a kind of futuristic vision of what a home could be like.
Yeah, like they were saying, in America, even cooking is easy and modern.
Right. It was a way to highlight American ingenuity and progress, especially in the context of the Cold War. This was the space race era, and the U.S. was all about proving their technological edge. You could even say food became another way to compete.
So it wasn't just about feeding people, it was about showcasing American know-how. Wow, it's crazy how a grocery store display can become part of this global ideological battle.
Absolutely. And you have to think about the historical context. This was after World War II. America was booming. The middle class was growing. There was this real sense of optimism. The American dream felt achievable, and part of that dream was this modern kitchen full of gadgets and easy to make food.
So this exhibition was like a snapshot of that ideal.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting to think about how that image would have resonated with people back then, both in America and in other parts of the world.
Did people buy into it? Like, did this American Dream Kitchen actually change how people cooked and ate in America?
Oh, definitely. Convenience foods like frozen dinners and instant mixes became super popular in this era. And the media was pushing it on too. Think about all those ads showing happy housewives effortlessly preparing meals with the latest appliances. It was a powerful image, and it really shaped what people wanted and what was considered normal.
That's so different from today, where there's all this focus on fresh food, local, organic, all that.
Right. Our values around food have definitely shifted. Convenience is still important, but there's more awareness about health and the environment. People care about where their food comes from, how it's produced.
So our kitchens tell a different story now than they did back in 1959.
Absolutely. Our kitchens reflect our changing values, just like those Cold War kitchens did.
But even though our kitchens are different, don't you think we're still dealing with that Cold War legacy? Like our fascination with technology and convenience.
That's a really interesting point. Our supermarkets are still full of processed food, and we rely on technology in the kitchen more than ever. Makes you wonder what people will think about our food choices in the future. What stories will their kitchens tell?
Okay, so speaking of legacies, we mentioned that the kitchen debate made Nixon look like a strong Cold Warrior, which helped him politically. But did that actually lead to any specific policies?
Well, Nixon was a complicated guy. He definitely used anti-communist rhetoric to his advantage, but he was also a pragmatist. Later on, as president, he started this period of détente with the Soviet Union. He even opened relations with China.
So even though he sparred with Khrushchev in that model kitchen, he was willing to talk and negotiate when it was good for America.
Exactly. It shows that ideology doesn't always control foreign policy. Nixon understood that you sometimes have to find common ground, even with your rivals.
Which, in a way, brings us back to the kitchen debate itself. It was symbolic, but it was also this small step towards better communication between these two superpowers that were, deeply suspicious of each other.
It shows how powerful these unexpected encounters can be, how even something seemingly mundane can have these ripple effects.
It blows my mind that a conversation in a kitchen could have such a huge impact.
It reminds us that history is often made in these small moments, personal interactions, individual personalities. Which brings us to another fascinating aspect of this whole story. We've talked about the politics and ideology, but what about the human element?
Right. We've been talking about Nixon and Khrushchev as these larger-than-life figures, but what were they like as people? What were their motivations, their personalities?
That's a great question, and it's what we'll be exploring in the final part of our deep dive. We'll look at their backgrounds, their experiences, and try to figure out what drove these two powerful men.
Okay, so we've been digging into this whole kitchen debate thing, the Cold War, the symbolism of food, how this one event had all these crazy consequences.
And now it's time to zoom in on the two guys at the center of it all, Richard Nixon and Nikita Khrushchev. They came from such different worlds, but there they were, arguing in a model American kitchen.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in all the politics, but I'm really curious about them as, just people. What were their stories? What made them tick?
Well, let's start with Nixon. Born in California, Quaker family, his early life was pretty tough, actually. Had to work his way through college and law school, so that probably made him super ambitious and driven.
So kind of a self-made man. I can see how that would shape his worldview.
Definitely. He got into politics early, served in Congress, became Eisenhower's VP. He was known for being really smart, always prepared, and like hardcore anti-communist.
Oh yeah, we saw that in the kitchen debate. He went after Khrushchev pretty hard, always trying to make America look better.
He was a master of political strategy, knew how to use images and symbols to his advantage, understood how to appeal to people's emotions.
But he also had this reputation for, how do I say this? Not exactly being the most charming guy.
Yeah. He could be pretty guarded, even paranoid, which, eventually led to Watergate and all that.
Right, right. It shows that even the most powerful people have their flaws.
Now, Khrushchev's path to power was totally different. Born into a peasant family in Russia, worked his way up through the Communist Party. He had to survive some pretty brutal Stalinist politics along the way.
So a survivor. He'd seen the dark side of the Soviet system firsthand.
Exactly. And that experience shaped how he led. He was blunt, unpredictable, definitely had a temper.
Yeah, no kidding. We saw that in the kitchen debate. Seemed like he enjoyed going head-to-head with Nixon.
But he wasn't just some hothead. He knew how to use propaganda, how to work a crowd. And it's interesting, there are some signs that he genuinely wanted to engage with the West, at least a little bit.
Really? That's surprising, considering all his tough talk during the debate. What makes you say that?
Well, there were times when he seemed open to diplomacy, trying to find common ground. He started some cultural exchanges, even met with some Western leaders like Kennedy.
It's wild to think that these two guys, clashing so hard in that kitchen, might have actually shared some goals, like, avoiding nuclear war.
It was such a tense time, so much responsibility. Maybe all that banter, even the arguments, was a way to let off some steam.
Like they were humanizing each other in this crazy high-stakes situation.
Right. It shows that even in the middle of conflict, there can still be these moments of connection.
So after hearing all this, what can we learn from these two guys, from their personalities, their different ideologies?
I think it shows how complicated leadership is. It's about navigating power, making tough decisions, and sometimes, finding ways to connect with people you completely disagree with.
And it's a reminder that history is made by actual people with strengths and weaknesses, and their personalities can have a huge impact on, well, everything.
The kitchen debate gives us this glimpse into the human side of the Cold War. It shows how personal experiences and motivations shaped this major historical event.
So we've covered the political stuff, the food, the ideologies, even Nixon and Khrushchev themselves. What's the takeaway? What should our listeners think about after hearing all this?
I think the biggest thing is that history is never simple. Even during the Cold War, as divided as things were, there was a lot of complexity, nuance, even humor.
Yeah, the kitchen debate shows that the world is full of contradictions and surprising connections. It makes us look beyond the surface, consider different points of view.
And most importantly, it shows that history is about people. It's all these individual stories and choices. And when we understand those stories, we get a much better understanding of how our world works.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a thought. Take a look around your own kitchen. What do the things in there tell you? What do they say about your values? How have historical events, even ones that seem far away, shaped the way you live and eat today?
That's such a great question. It shows that history isn't really in the past. It's still alive, still shaping us in ways we might not even realize.
And that's a wrap on the kitchen debate. Thanks for joining us on this trip back in time. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and who knows, maybe you'll even have your own kitchen debate someday.